Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Conversations and Insights from the Kansas Education Funding Task Force. I'm Dr. Tracy Frederick, the Executive Director of the Kansas School Board Resource Center, and Ward Cassidy, the KSBRC Senior Advisor, is able to join us today as well. Now, if you're not familiar with the Kansas School Board Resource Center, you should know that our singular mission is to help school board members be effective advocates for students to focus on improving academic outcomes. So before we begin with introductions and an overview, I want to give just a short housekeeping item. We will have questions and answers, and our panelists would like for you to go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, you have a circle with three little dots. If you click on that, you'll see the Q&A box there, and then that will be placed at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and put your questions in that, and I will ask them for you as we go along at the appropriate time. So they want to make this as interactive as possible. Also, this presentation is being recorded if you didn't hear that, so you'll receive a link to the recording to review and share with as many people as you wish. And as always, I will send you a link to the recording, and we will also archive it on the workshop video section of the KSBRC webpage. This afternoon, we are pleased to have with us two state legislators who are well qualified, not just because of their work on the Kansas Education Funding Task Force, but also because of their professional backgrounds. Both have served in the classroom and they understand the struggles teachers and schools have. They are well qualified to speak to the issues regarding education funding. With us today is Senator Renee Erickson, a lifelong Kansan and former teacher, principal, and administrator. She holds 2 master's degrees and has dedicated her career to improving education and strengthening communities. Senator Erickson was elected to the Senate in 2020, and she currently serves as the vice chair of the Education Funding Task Force and chair of the Senate Education Committee, and is champion of fiscal responsibility, education reform, and constitutional rights. Joining her today is Representative Dr. Megan Steele. She also serves on the Education Funding Task Force and the K-12 Education Budget Committees. Representative Steele brings a grassroots education and healthcare focused perspective to the Kansas State Legislature. Representative Steele is deeply committed to family values, parental rights, government accountability, and restoring excellence in education. She believes that every child deserves the fundamental right to read. So today, Senator Erickson and Representative Steele will discuss the factors being considered in the Kansas Education Funding Task Force Committee as they develop recommendations for policymakers. The Kansas Education Funding Task Force is charged with examining the state's K-12 finance system to determine whether education funding is aligned with student achievement, taxpayer accountability, and the long-term sustainability of public education and opportunities to improve outcomes for Kansas students. There's been a lot of different kinds of information circulating around about the Education Funding Task Force, some accurate and some not. So we look forward to hearing from Senator Erickson and Representative Steele to gain a better, accurate understanding of the work that they are doing and all of the issues that are under consideration in the task force. Now, we know that you both have a lot of information you want to cover, and you want to make sure you answer all of the questions that the audience has. So we'll just get right to it, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Frederick. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for joining. As you said, there's a lot of information floating around. This is a monumental task that we've been charged with to develop a new school formula because the current one expires June 30th of 2027. So Dr. Steele, Representative Steele, and I kind of put together just a little bit of fundamental information about the task force, its charge, its statutory requirements, kind of where we're at, and some of the topics of discussion, the data we've been using to look at as we consider how we're going to change our finance formula. So we will walk through that a little bit. And as you said, please make this as interactive, ask questions as well. We want to be as helpful as we can to viewers. So Representative Steele, anything to add?
Thank you, Dr. Frederick, and to Senator Erickson. I am honored to be here to, talk about our funding task force and where we've been, what we've been doing over the past 2 years, and where we plan to go ultimately to make sure that our students are learning in public schools. So we will go ahead and kick it off, but please ask questions so we can help along the way instead of wait till the end. And then I
Okay, Dr.
Representative
Steele, I
Steele,
think,
I think you're muted.
yeah, I think we lost your sound there for a second. So,
Oh, I
um,
was just saying, Senator, I'll go ahead and move the screen and you can
oh, okay.
start there.
Okay, so you were cut off there for a moment. So, well, the task force is statutorily charged, and the makeup of it is we have 11 voting members, and those voting members were appointed by leadership in the legislature. And then we have four officio members, excuse me, that are from KSDE, from the state education. So the makeup is there are a total of 15 members, but only 11 vote. And as Dr. Frederick said, we are charged with evaluating our current SEE formula and that law, and we are charged with draft brand new formula. And we have some parameters that we have to consider. Some of the same in the lawsuits. That has to be equitable. It has to be adequate. We have to build in some accountability, and we'll talk a lot about what does accountability look like finance formula. And we make a recommendation to the legislature by January 11th of 2020. So we have our work cut out for us.
A lot of the way that the school finance formula is currently structured really came from the Montoy and the Gannon court cases, and that was really where that KISA, that actual definition of it came from and where it is. And really, if you just kind of take a quick overview of our current funding formula, right? We have the base aid that everyone gets. There's 11 weightings. We'll get to those in just a little bit too. Really 12 if you count virtual schools, but not everyone has virtual schools. And so we have spent months, really well over a year, going through all of those weightings, really evaluating those weightings, what is working, what isn't, so that way we can get our recommendation to the legislature. And then once that recommendation is there, it still has to go through the entire process of getting a bill passed through. So it's got to go through both chambers, depending on whether the governor supports it or not. So it's not just, hey, this is what the task force did. There's a whole other process behind it, which is it would be like a bill and passing the bill the same way that all the other bills get passed.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that's really important to remember, because I do think one of the mission points is that what the task force with is what's going to happen. And that is absolutely not true. It does have to go through the legislative process. It's a recommendation of our work to the legislature for consideration.
All right, so go ahead. Okay. The core areas that we have been focusing on is what does it look like to do a complete whole new formula? What does it look like to just maybe tweak a few of the weightings? What does it look like to maybe get rid of a few of the weightings? Really evaluating all of that. Whenever we are looking at the information and the data, we haven't just spent time looking at Kansas and what's been successful in Kansas. We've looked at what's going on in all of the other states. I mean, we have received page after page of information and spreadsheet and tables to really go through what's working in other states, what isn't working, where are the states having success in specific funding categories, and what can we look at. So those are the types of different inputs and outputs that we have been looking at.
Yeah, and you're going to hear a lot about specialization funding within this. Currently, we have a reimbursement model, and most states do not do it that way. There's only states that reimburse for excess of special education. And I think that's areas we are looking at probably the hardest is to a different way of funding special education to make it more targeted for the specific exceptionality. And so just so everyone is aware, that's going to be one of the big areas we change. We have decided we are going to stick with student-based formula, but the weightings are really where we're spending our time talking. And it's been very interesting to see how other states fund certain areas of their formula. We are absolutely an outlier by including gifted in education funding. So some of those things have really the light that I think we're looking at very hard about doing it better, more for students. And we have pounded the table about we've got to focus not just on how much putting in, how is that helping our students be successful?
Well, I have a question for you. We have an attendee who asked, and this is not going to be a surprise to you that you're going to get this question. How do you respond to the constant mantra from, people out there that say, wait a minute, special education is not fully funded at the 92% level in statute? How do you explain that? Is it not, or how does that fold into some of this reform that you're looking at with special education?
I
How
think one
much
of the
time do we have?
myths.
Do we only have an hour? We could talk an hour just on that, but Representative Steele, I'll toss that to you.
Okay. Well, I think one of the big misnomers about that thing is it's 92% subject to appropriations. And there's not always the appropriations available. So subject to appropriations is really key. And the other key thing to that is it's 92% of the state's overall excess costs, not 92% of each district, each building overall cost. And so I think a lot of times it gets misinformation like, oh, well, our school district didn't get 92% coverage. Well, it's the overall state overall excess cost. So excess costs of the state, that has to be included in the conversation, and subject to appropriations has to be included into the conversation. We can, like Senator Erickson said, I could talk about this for well over an hour. I mean, we can look at how is the school district using their at-risk funding. At-risk funding should be being used for those students that are needing extra assistance. We could talk about cash reserves. There's lots of different ways we could go about that, but ultimately, the two main things are states overall, as well as subject to appropriations. Senator?
I will also add that when they say the percent of that percent that's decreasing, what they're not telling you is in the last 5 years, we've given over $100 million more to special education. That is misleading. There's nothing magical about the 92% being, well, that's what we've determined is the amount of funding that's required to make sure students receive the services they need to. There's nothing magical. It was just agreement in the lawsuit era. But we are giving more money, but they're spending more. Here's the thing we need to consider is how are we identifying? Kansas is way high on identifying our rate of students that we identify led compared to other states. So an issue there. But I think the bottom is subject to appropriations. We are giving of millions of dollars more to special education. Why are the needs increasing? And but here's the bottom line: according to the court case, we are fully funding special education. We have met our Montoy obligations, so they want to say that, and which is why I think some just are looking at suing us again. Special education funding, we've known it's coming, so here we are. And I say, let's look at the matter, and I think people will see there are some well over the 92%. So we've got some issues to work. But the bottom line is, what should we be the special education kids? Is it going where it needs to go? That's the question to me. And are those outcomes?
Thank
Another
you.
piece,
Go
I'll
ahead.
add just one other piece that some people also don't look at when you're looking holistically at this at the whole special education is in Kansas we are very blessed to have School for the Deaf and School for the Blind, and those are fully funded, and both of those schools are special education schools. And so those are fully funded, and the services that they provide actually assist schools in all over the state of Kansas. And so sometimes people don't realize that they're getting services that are special education that are through those districts that are also getting funded as well.
And may I add, those aren't counted toward the state is contributing towards special education. But if those districts had to take those students, it would be. And we also don't get credit for the local special ed LOB money. So there's a lot more to the puzzle. I wish we would switch from how much money to how effectively are we using it and how's it helping kids. And that's what we're trying to build in as we have these conversations.
And I'm sure that those were part of your conversations as you look at this, in the task force and you consider all the pieces to the puzzle in getting those outcomes achieved as you think about funding all of these initiatives to ensure that those outcomes are achieved.
Yes, and that kind of flows right into our next slide is really, kind of the overall summary work in progress. And what Senator Erickson was talking about earlier is, we don't want to look at a dollar sign. We don't, that, yes, we have to, but the overall picture is what are our students learning? Are our student learning outcomes being met? Are our students proficient in reading? Are they proficient in math? Can they be successful when they graduate high school? And so that is one of the things that we have spent time as a task force looking at is, shifting to more of that student-based models. Really, are we meeting what is accountability and ensuring that funding and accountability are tied together?
The other thing I'll add on this slide is we have had extensive conversations in the task force about what should we be using because there are to point out the increased funding and lower student outcomes. Well, every time we point to specific assessment, whether it's the assessment, NAEP, ACT, the other side will say that's not a valid metric. That's not valid. That's not a measure. And so we have consistently what we've got to be able to agree and hold everyone accountable. What is a metric or metrics? Maybe it's more than one that we can agree that this is what we use to measure and hold districts accountable for student progress and outcomes. So far, we haven't been, it's like nailing Jello to the wall. No one wants to be able to say, we can agree it's not perfect, but this we'll use for progress monitoring. This is what we'll use for assessment. This is what we'll use. They don't want to agree to any kind of metrics. And so that's what that bottom bullet, we've got to agree on what we're going to say, measure student success.
I know for several people on the task force, having a graduation rate that is high doesn't mean success. And that's also really difficult to measure because you've got some school districts that say, a D can go all the way down to a 50. Well, if somebody's getting a 50 on something, is that really proficient? Are they able to be successful? And so we have so many different things going on inside districts, rural, urban, districts that, potentially have a higher tax base. It's just, there's so many different elements to whenever we have a formula to really take into consideration. And that has been a struggle, getting everyone to agree on what does that true accountability look like. One of the other things that is on there on this particular slide is dealing with at-risk funding. For me personally, it is frustrating to see that we've had an increase in special education costs and an increase in students on special education over the past few years when there's specific funding that's supposed to be helping with that. And we've had 3 different audits from post-audit at the legislature showing that at-risk dollars aren't going to students that are at risk. And that does cause a bit of concern and, the need to ask more questions and gather more information so that way we really truly can have metrics in place.
Well, as it is, as you point out, isn't the law say that the at-risk funding needs to go above and beyond, specifically to those students who are at risk, not folded into kind of the general ledger?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Those are to be for certain above and beyond what the normal class instruction that's provided. And have found in all three of the audits that Representative Steele mentioned is that's not happening. Last year, we spent over $500 million, over $530 million to help at-risk kids, and we've done that for decades. Think of the billions of dollars supposed to. That was really the crux of the loss. We're leaving a big students behind, so we poured billions of dollars into, and what we found is it's not used for what it's supposed to be used for. They found things being used for graduation decorations and memberships to SAMs and TVs. I Those are kind of, the ones that stand out. But I think what a lot of districts do, honestly, I think they use it for salaries, for teacher salaries. And the rules around using at-risk money for those salaries is very, very, very specific. And I think it's been abused. And that's why not only are we not increase in outcomes for those at-risk kiddos, they're going down. So obviously, this is a big issue that we've talked about. How can we restructure that over $500 million a year to really impact kids that need that help? And what defines at-risk? If you look at the criteria for at-risk, goodness, that's about every student in the whole school. So we've got to be more intentional. We've got to be more accountable for where the dollars are going. And then I think we'll see some help in those areas. I think the big thing to do is make sure that kids are reading by grade 3. That'll take a lot, I think, of the at-risk out as kids progress through their education process.
Well, that certainly has been evident in other states who have moved in that direction, even the state to the south most recently. There was, and we have an attendee who's asking about, you've talked a lot about, looking at the end and thinking about the outcomes of the dollars that we're spending. Are they being used in a way that really presents that ROI at the end and getting where we want our students to be? So is there any part of education funding that you think might be able to be used as an incentive to districts to improve student outcomes? Do you see that as part of something, part of this conversation that you're having?
That's a very in-depth question that we've had a lot of conversations about, and specifically it's been around teacher pay and
Mm.
rewarding teachers that are meeting the duties that they need to be meeting. And there seems to be a group that doesn't want to reward teachers for doing a good job because they think it might seem unfair, or they might have more difficult students than another classroom teacher has. And ultimately, whenever you look at states that have a teacher merit pay, for essentially a bonus for doing a good job, they actually have way better student outcomes. And so the data directly aligns with that. It's just trying to get the 11 voting members on a task force to be able to work together to truly see what could those measurements look at. So yes, we have done it. I do think that rewarding schools for doing what they're supposed to be doing is a great thing, but I'm only one vote.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other thing I would say that is if you look at our current system, and you may not, a lot of people don't frame it this way, will we give money the fail? The more students, the worse their performance, the more that's where we put the money. And yes, those students need, but we've looked at how long, for example, how long students in Kansas are on getaway for ELL services. It's way longer than other states that put an in, because they know that depending on where it enters the system as an ELL student, how long it should take for them to be off of ELL services, we're way beyond that. I I would propose that it's because we have any guardrails on that, and the longer they're in programs and service, the more money that we pay. So if we flip that and say, hey, the more effective you are, we're going to reward that. And those of you who still are struggling, you're either going to get better or we're going to come in and intervene. I mean, that's just our kids deserve that level of, I think, accountability. I think that's absolutely, there's talk about incentivizing the wrong thing in our system. We incentivize success, not failure.
Thank you.
And that kind of moves straight into those 11 weightings that we have, especially dealing with the ELL and the bilingual. That is a weighting that has been really looked at, especially what is going on in other states. And as the Senator said, Kansas, I was shocked to know that we have students that literally for years, I mean, you're talking more than 5 years, have been on ELL services. And that really brings to mind, why are they not successful? Why are they still there? I mean, I understand a couple years, but 5+ years is really a long time, and Kansas is an outlier for that. And so obviously other states are succeeding and doing it in a shorter amount of time with higher expectations and accountability. And so I think that that's something to definitely take a look at. When we look at these overall 11 weightings, this is the data that we have been using. And we have been looking at all of the other states in our nation. What are they doing without risk? What are they doing with CTE? And that's the data that we have been looking at from other states and really trying to figure out, what can we do in the state of Kansas to ensure that our students are becoming proficient so they can be successful. Another one that, we've talked about the ELL, we talked a little bit about special education. One of the interesting weightings is the low and high enrollment. And it doesn't matter what school district you are, you're getting money because there's no school that doesn't get a low or high enrollment weighting. And that has seemed to bring a lot of questions of, what does that look like to take those funds and essentially roll them into increasing the base fund, because we're not so sure we're really seeing the benefits of the low and the high enrollment. So that is something that we've definitely spent a lot of time discussing in committee.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? I mean, we have a lot of school districts who come to us and say, well, we're losing students, and so therefore we're losing, funding, we're losing opportunity, we're going to have to cut teachers, we're going to have to close schools, all those kinds of things. And so, they're dealing with some of this decrease in funding, and so therefore they say we can't provide as high quality of education. How are you dealing with what seems to be a state issue of low enrollment or declining enrollment across Kansas?
Maybe you want to take that, or you want me to kick it off?
You kick it off and I'll jump in on the end.
Yeah, well, around as the waiting, there's talk of keeping, to your point, Dr. Frederick, keeping districts that do have the low, those, especially we see this in a lot of rural areas, the declining to where we have, and I've forgotten the exact number, but it's growing yearly, districts with fewer than students. We have a lot of those, and we will keep some type of low enrollment weighting. It may not be based on the same criteria, but there's no doubt that when you have a school and you have fewer students, you still have to cover those costs. So we will have some type of be called low enrollment. It may be a sparsity. Maybe we will look at different ways of funding shrinking rural districts. They have to exist. We have to provide services for kiddos. But that way of funding those may look differently. High enrollment, believe it or not, I think we have pretty well mutual agreement. High enrollment weighting is going away. That one we just do not need. If you're growing, we have ancillary weighting for districts that are growing. You get increased funding for students. So I think there's broad agreement. Enrollment makes no sense. How we do smaller districts, I think how we do that will change, but there will be additional funding for those districts.
And a decrease in school enrollment really is a nationwide trend right now. It's not just a Kansas thing. And the nice thing is when we are looking at that data, we're able to see it nationwide and see how it's affecting. And like Senator said, the rural schools are vital and they're crucial, and we do need to help provide for those students. And I have heard some misinformation about, well, this task force just wants to eliminate public schools, or they want to cut funding completely. That is not at all what we are looking at. We are looking at what is the most efficient way to continue to fund our public schools and have accountability for the product that they're producing. And so we have to take a hard look at these enrollment numbers and the enrollment weightings that are there. And that's one of the reasons that those are coming under scrutiny the most, is the low enrollment is helping those districts with 100 or less students. But for the districts, it's kind of divided into two. It really stops, I think it's like 1,600 is where one of the numbers is. And it's like 999 is like the other one. But those districts with the high enrollment, it's really not seem to be needed anymore.
And I
Well, I
do,
appreciate you. Go ahead,
yeah,
Senator
I
Erickson. Sorry.
do think, to Representative Still's point, we will look at those when those levels were set for what qualifies as low enrollment, et cetera. The shift has been shocking. I think we will look at those numbers as to what qualifies for low enrollment, et cetera. I would encourage people to do is look at consolidating your administrative functions. Do you really need 6 superintendents in a county with 1,000 students? Do you really need 6 business offices? Not necessarily considering the actual schools, but do you really need all of the administrative functions? How about looking at these there?
Well, I appreciate that. I know that, as you mentioned, Representative Steele, that this is a national issue, but what we also know is that 80–90% of our students continue to go to public school. There are many people who say, well, they're leaving public school either for homeschool or school choice. And so continuing to allow that, in some way, or, is hurting public schools. But we know that public schools are here to stay, and that they are kind of the bedrock of this great conversation that we have going on here in our country, and continuing to make sure that everybody has that opportunity for education. So those low enrollment districts are feeling a little nervous about, as their populations dwindle a little bit, and they, to consider the issues of how do we continue to serve our students in much more, as you said, Senator Erickson, in a sparse landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the other areas on this waiting is the new school facilities waiting. We really don't have anyone getting any of that waiting right now. And so I get a strong feeling that maybe we can all agree that that was the waiting that potentially would be able to be removed, retweaked, better to serve school districts. And so when we look at this list, there is the one waiting that most people can really look at, and it's the way that that waiting was done, and and dealing with some bonding, which is why schools aren't able to use that waiting right now. Do you have anything else, Senator, on this slide?
I don't think so. I would just point out, a lot of people ask about the COLA. That is used
Oh.
by just a very few districts. That is all local money. There isn't associated with that. People are like, what is that? And there are Northeast districts that do take advantage of that, just to help the cost of living in a area and being able to have personnel for your school district. So, but that in the state issue. So ask me about that, and I say it's a local funding mechanism that very few districts take advantage of. So if there's curiosity about that, we can give them more information.
Okay.
All right. Our favorite word, accountability. Senator, you can kick this one off.
A lot of the talk is about and everyone agrees. Everyone around the table on the task force will say, yes, everyone has to be accountable. What that looks like, what happens if aren't successful. These are the hard conversations. Again, it kind of goes back to, we can't even agree on what metrics we're going to use to measure success. The less, what happens, if a district isn't performing up those accountability standards, what do we do? And so this has really taken a lot of our time as a task force. There's a group of us that are absolutely, myself included, I'll speak for myself, we have to have better student academic outcomes. We must. Our students deserve it. And as it relates to maybe funding mechanisms, we fund equally across. It doesn't matter if you're in kindergarten or if junior in high school. You get the same base, the same. A lot of states, which I have found intriguing, front load K-3. They front load elementary funding to make sure that those kids get the foundation before moving on to high school. That makes a lot of sense to me because you look at a lot of our at-risk criteria. If we were to give them that foundation early, make sure we've got the resources in early to get them started on the right foot, we're not going to have a lot of the at-risk kids their 7th, 8th, 11th, 12th grades. I think that's a concept we'll take a lot of look at is maybe heavier weighting earlier in the process.
I agree with that statement, and I am one of those people, as Senator said, being a group that's really focused on that. There is a lot of proof to students that can proficiently read at a third grade level at the end of third grade. That they are successful. Two things that we have learned during this process I have found to be very intriguing. And the first one is how do jails determine how many beds they're going to need in the future? Might shock you, but they use third grade reading level proficiency. That's shocking to me. So we can help kids make better choices because they can proficiently read. That's the correlation there. And then the other statistic that is out there that was just a shock to me as well is the economic of your state. Do you know how economists help determine the true economic benefit of your state? They look at the proficiency of 8th grade math scores.
Mm-hmm.
So it is true that students being proficient in reading and proficient in math help success not only of your community, but of your state. And Senator Erickson has said from the get-go, how your family is, how your kids are, there goes your community, there goes your state. And so as a state, when we have an obligation to help with education, we want to make sure that our kids are proficient. And that's what I'm looking at for accountability.
Tracy, can I throw in a question?
Sure.
On this front loading of K through 3, how many states do that, or what states have you guys found that are doing that? I haven't done that yet, and I've done a lot with K through 3 reading, and I just wondered what states are doing that.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with you on that. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I will tell you it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Okay.
States that haven't are
You have
finding.
two states now that have basically gone to third grade reading. If you're not on grade level, they're going to retain you. So there's certainly a tremendous push. I love that front loading idea. I'll be quiet after that, but if we can catch them before they get out of third grade, we're going to do better.
Absolutely. And so I think that will become the norm before long. I think that we're seeing the benefits of that. Sarah Huckabee Sanders with the Arms Act in Arkansas has been leading a lot of this, as well as the Mississippi Miracle, holding those kids accountable early. I think it will pay off if we have investment early. And so I'm big proponent. The more I've looked, and I was shocked, as Representative Steele said, 8th grade math. We've been on the bandwagon of the Blueprint for Literacy here in Kansas, really pushing, getting those reading skills in our students and helping them read. I tell you right now, we're already working on a math blueprint because it's just as important. And so going to be coming as well. Reading and math, we've got to get our kids proficient in that early. And I think that will set them up for success as they go through their educational career. So making that investment, I'm all for it.
We have several states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, I think Kentucky might be the other one, that are really investing time, energy, and money into that early elementary. And that, like Senator Erickson said, is very intriguing because we know that if we can be successful there, the students are going to have success further on.
Yeah.
Interestingly, when we had our Mississippi Miracle webinar, the expert talked about how it was kind of shocking to them that the reading scores improved, but they were really an unexpected surprise was how their math scores jumped even more significantly.
You have to be able to read to do math. And I don't think sometimes I think we put them in their silos, but reading is a direct correlation to math success.
Where are we?
Are you good on this slide, Senator?
I'm good. If there aren't any other questions, we can keep going.
I guess there is one other very quick question. I know we got on to, accountability in the third grade. I know Oklahoma also is joining this, kind of this group of looking at that, whether the students continue past third grade, they can't read at that third grade level. We think about accountability, or initially, I think about accreditation. So is there a connection there? I know that, that accreditation is to ensure that students are improving, and specifically in some certain areas. Is the cross there? Is that there opportunity for accountability through the accreditation process?
Well, there should be. A few years ago, the State Board of Education took out all of academic accountability for accreditation. It was all built on kindergarten readiness and having an individual plan of study, all of these things, but nothing about academic outcomes. I think that they are going back and putting in academic standards in the accreditation process, which we have to do. But you talk about a lack of it. For those who are listening, those school board members there, if you think that accreditation is accountability, you need to really dig in and look at. There is not accountability in accreditation. Schools that we know aren't meeting the standard, aren't following state law, get accredited single year. If you equate accreditation accountability, that's a big mistake. And as a school board, please don't do that. Look at true outcome, your own measures of accountability as a school district. Where should we expect kids to grow and be able to at a local level? We can set some statewide, but you all know your kids, the district, and we're not looking for them to score necessarily a 3 or 4 on a state assessment. Are showing growth year over year? That's what we want to see. And that accountability is not, kindergarten readiness, which, by the way, we're seeing a lot of districts fail on their screening of kindergarten readiness. They're still being accredited. So just please don't equate those two. Accountability equals accreditation.
Thank you.
We also asked a lot of questions, especially the past couple task force meetings, about student outcomes and measuring of student outcomes. And that's where we really saw that this whole accreditation and accountability really doesn't align. And that's another intriguing situation of trying to get the voting members, the task force together on accountability, is because student learning outcomes, and while they do need to be individual to the local school districts and things like that, they're really not a priority when they should be the priority. And we should really be making sure that what KSDE has is their student learning outcomes, that we're measuring that. And you as a school board member, what are your district learning outcomes, and are you measuring those? Because if you just have this accreditation checkbox, you're not measuring the student learning outcomes, because graduation rate, kindergarten readiness are not student learning outcomes. Are they learning what they need to be learning, and are you measuring that for your success of your students?
Well, you make a good point, because we talk about accountability on a state level, which both of you are working on with this task force, but you really can't do that I mean, you can do that on a state level, but really it has to start on that local level in order for it to be able to be effective.
Yes, local, local, local. And as school board members, I think sometimes that, you're learning this whole new language of education. You may not be experienced with it, and you might see, oh, hey, we're accredited, but the accreditation through the State Board of Education has nothing to do with your local student learning outcomes. And those are the outcomes that your school has set to show that, students are going to be successful and they're going to be meeting that. And so that's really we want to see. We want to see local districts have their local student learning outcomes and that they're being able to meet those. And as a school board member, maybe you're not meeting them. Maybe it's because, it's really an unrealistic learning outcome, or maybe you're just blowing it out of the park and you need to challenge yourself and your teachers more and redo those.
I have to throw
And
in, graduation rates aren't as significant of how great your school is.
No, they
Not
are
by
not.
any way, sense, or form. And I cannot tell you how many school board members, that's the first thing they'll say, well, our graduation rate. If they can't get a job, if they can't make it in junior college, they're not, yay for them, they graduated, but they're not quite, not what you should be doing.
Ward, you bring up a great point about not making it in junior college. We have university professors coming to us all the time talking about how the students they have are not prepared to meet the standards in their classroom. And these are basic freshman level courses. They're not able to write, they're not able to do those
Right.
basic math skills for college algebra. And now they're happening to do all of these relearning, have different courses, and is the state paying for them? Is it not? Will grants pay for them? Will they not? And so this is not just a K-12 issue. It really is a lifelong learning issue, and why we are so it feels like we're constantly like harping on this accountability, but it really sets up students for future success.
I visited with a junior college registrar last week, and basically he said 50% of their enrollment will need remediation in writing. Something's
yeah, not
not
surprising. And I've been a broken record on, okay, your graduation rate. Tell me what that says as far as what a student knows and is able to
right.
do. Because I'm with you, what I hear it all the time are they've got this, we used to call them remedial courses,
Right.
call them concurrent, where they get college and remediation at the same time. So we've had to be careful about, we just had a bill that says the state's not paying again for remedial portions of college. We'll pay credit level course, but not remediate. We already paid for that in the K-12 system. So you're absolutely right. I don't care how many graduate, are they prepared for the next step to take, whether that's career or college? And sadly, an alarming number of students are not, and that's not right.
Agree.
Our last slide
I will.
was Q&A. Oh, go ahead, Senator.
I will just add real quick in here, going back to the finance formula, and when we talk about, local districts and accountability, I do think that there is a sentiment that I share, because we hear, well, we continue here, even though we've done a lot of work in not silo lots of money, there are some federal requirements, and you have to use, national school program money for food, you have to use DEA money for, we know those restrictions. The state, we've really tried to be as flexible as we. I think that will continue as we work on the school finance formula to give districts the maximum ability to put resources they need to help their local students be successful. But what we will expect is to see growth in student academic achievement. But I do want to let local school board members know we are trying to give you as much flexibility the formula to put the money where you need it, so that we can help those kiddos succeed.
And kind of in addition to that, on the state level, this year in session, we had a bill and it passed through that I believe it was a proviso in our budget bill, but it allowed KSDE essentially, they all have their buckets of money and those buckets are what they're assigned for. But what we did was say, hey, you have this money, use it for these types of situations too. So professional development, mentor teachers. So now that their money is a little bit more flexible and is able to be used where it is needed. Again, though, we want accountability with that.
I think that you bring up something, when you talk about accountability, I mean, I think every one of us has seen this, help a teacher, the kind of the GoFundMe or here's my Amazon account. I'm a teacher to help me with supplies. So the perception is, that districts just don't have the money to support teachers in the classroom. We have districts that we know of that we've worked with that just don't have curriculum. And so what do you say to the public who says, wait a minute, you say that you're funding, that you have appropriate funding, you're looking for accountability, but then, I'm having to buy reams of paper for my teacher, or I'm having to help to contribute to, books in the classroom. So is there anything that you can to say to that?
Well, yeah, I'll jump in. A couple of things. It pass if teachers choose to use out of their pocket to buy, there is a tax that I think it's up to $500 that we passed. It up a little bit, but teachers should have not, unless they want to, shouldn't have that. I will tell you, and I was on board for 8 years. I was president for 2. Priorities. It is absolutely priorities. We had a situation where teachers were one ream of copy paper in the day without all the technology, where you had to go to copy room and make tons of copies. One a semester, but when I was on the school board, we were paying for cell phone and cell phone plans for administrators. And I said, not that maybe it's a safety concern with cell phone for administrator, but is that more important than resources for the classroom? You have to make those choices. And to me, it's a matter of priority. And I will say, if your priorities are straight, I've looked at the finances, districts, you have the money, find where it's going. Ask those questions. And you have to prioritize just like we do in family budgets. Is it nice if we have, some extra? Absolutely. Important than the essentials. Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize.
And I might step on a few toes with this one, but a Pinterest looking classroom is going to produce the same results as just regular classroom boards, and a whiteboard in the classroom. And I think sometimes our teachers want things to look so spectacular that we lose sight of that priority, and our districts lose sight of that. An area as a school board member that you can look at is look at your cash reserves. You have a lot of cash reserves there. I know I've seen the spreadsheets, and really examine where is that money going? How can we help our teachers have the resources that they need to use? Sometimes as a school board, working with school board members, I have found that, they've gone and they've asked their superintendent, why can't we fund it? Oh, well, we don't have the money there. I really, really encourage you to dig deeper than that answer and really look at those cash reserves and say, hey, in our general fund, we have this. We can absolutely afford pens and pencils for our teachers in their classrooms.
You bring up a good question, and we talk to school board members about this all of the time. And just this last week, I was in Charleston with School Boards for Academic Excellence, and this came up in conversations about budget. That school board members ask questions and ask specific questions, and don't just look at the overall overall look at the budget, but ask specific questions about that budget. And if the school board is on the same page of that priority of we want to make sure that we have our classrooms fully funded, that we have the curriculum that we need, we have the textbooks that we need. So we're going to start there, and then we will move out from there and make sure that all of our funds are spent in that direction. Then asking some of those very specific and honest questions. I see that our teachers are out there, having all of these GoFundMe's and all of these Amazon accounts to, for their classrooms. Can you talk to me a little bit about, I have a question about how we're funding our classrooms. And so I think you make a really good point. Asking questions, honest questions, will be able to provide a lot of answers, and then we'll be able to determine whether you are fully funding your priorities. Because those are the
And I
things that
would
you're asking on the task force.
Yes.
absolutely. And I would just add that there was a time when expectation, I believe it was even in statute, I don't know that we ever hit it, was that 65% of funds would go directly to the classroom. I saw a statistic a couple weeks ago, and that had gone down. We were at about, I believe, 57. I think we're down to 53% directly to the classroom. We're again, ask those questions to your Dr. Frederick. That shouldn't be happening. We should be that percent go up, not down, if our priority is right.
Well, thank you very much. Do you have any other questions, Ward? We're about 4 minutes, and I want our audience to know if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. We have just a couple of minutes. We'd be happy to ask those of our panelists. I know that they're working diligently, very long hours, and spending a lot of time poring over the spreadsheets and the information. Both of our panelists have a heart for excellent education and are working diligently toward that.
I just throw out school board members
Sure.
need to ask questions. They need to be involved and need to understand and not just trust that their superintendent's always going to give them the exact right information. There's a lot of great superintendents out there, but I have talked to so many school board members just in this past month that they've never talked to a teacher. You know, you need to be involved in your district to find out what's going on. And it's a hard job. It's a hard job being a school board member, but understanding the budget and, like you guys have said, asking the right questions. If it was up to me, I'd high load that first 3 years so big and get those kids reading and math, and you're going to solve a lot of problems. And there are districts that are doing that right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
Agreed. And we know that, oftentimes that school board members will come onto the board and they feel a little bit intimidated because it is kind of education speak. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve, but please don't be, intimidated or ask those questions, because probably a lot of other people are thinking the same question or wondering the same thing also, just like we have in our classrooms. We do have one final question. Any proposed changes to bonds, as many districts with declining enrollments are pushing those?
That really hasn't been a big talking point or data collection point, because bonds work differently and are really of the vote of the people of the district. And that's not really contributable to the actual 11 weightings in the base rate that we have. So that's not something that we have spent time into, mainly because it is the vote of the local people that live there.
Yeah, that's kind of outside the purview of this, that we don't talk about it like in committee, but outside the task force. So be interested to hear that as we go into committees in the next.
Well, we are toward the end of our time, and thank you both once again. This has been a fantastic webinar, really providing a lot of good practical information about all the things that you're doing at the state level to ensure that our schools are well funded, and that those funds are going back into the classroom. We thank you so much for taking the time to provide your insight and clarification and transparency to all the conversations you're having at the Kansas Education Task Force work. I know that school board members and district leaders, as they prepare for the work of providing for excellent education for our students and for college, to prepare them for college and careers, that this information will be very helpful for them as they look toward the future and planning. So thank you both very much. For the rest of us, you can continue to stay tuned for some more webinars that are coming up. You can find those on our events page. On Monday, this coming Monday, on July 6th at noon, we will have a legislative policy update with Mike O'Neill. And also those policy updates have been prepared and will be distributed prior to the webinar. On Wednesday, July 28th at 11 a.m., Paul Runco from Defending Education will discuss concerns raised about the Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice curriculum program that was formerly known as Teaching Tolerance. We also have some other webinars that are in the works September 1st, and this will be put together soon. Fritz Edmonds, the Kansas attorney, and the SBAE, Kansas hotline attorney, present information on AI in Kansas public schools, and we are scheduling a webinar with Jonathan Vogel, an education attorney and former deputy general counsel for higher education, will discuss the role of board attorney. But also want to make sure that if you've not received the information from us, that the Kansas Attorney General's office will hold a COMA training webinar on Wednesday, July 15th at 11 a.m. If you did not receive that information, please reach out. I'll be happy to send you a registration link for that webinar, or I'm sure you can find that on the AG's website, but would be happy to assist you with that. And always, if you have a topic that you would like for us to discuss on a webinar, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll find the experts to be able to bring that information to you. And we hope that you've enjoyed this as much as we have, and hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day, and that this has been able to provide you with information that you need to ask a lot of questions if you are a board member or if you're a superintendent, to think about the funding that will be coming to your school soon. Thanks so much, and enjoy your day.